Maybe you already think I am a monster. Fine. But I was right in every one of those situations. Marta was not a member of my family. She was hired help. We paid her to work inside our house, follow our rules, and do what I asked. When someone accepts your money, you have every right to remind them who is in charge. Daniel always sat there with that calm little expression whenever he was too weak to challenge me. So before you decide that I was cruel, let me tell you the whole story. Then you can choose her side or mine. My name is Claire Whitmore, I am 36, and I build luxury events for people who pay more for flowers than my mother once earned in a month. I am not cruel. I am honest about how a house works. Marta was not my sister, my friend, or some secret second mother to my children. She was the help, and we paid her to follow our rules. Daniel always sat there with that calm little face, straightening a napkin whenever he was too weak to challenge me. So hear the whole story before you choose her side, because I intended to remind everyone exactly who ran my house. I had spent most of my life building that house before a single wall existed. When I was 8, my mother cleaned apartments for women who spoke about her as if she could not hear them. We lived in 2 rooms above a pharmacy, and in winter she stuffed towels into the leaking window near my bed. I learned early that money did not only buy comfort, it bought the right to be heard. Of course, people pretend status means nothing, but they usually say that from homes they never feared losing. My house had white floors, tall windows, and a dining room for 14 guests. I chose every detail. Even the house keys felt important in my hand. Marta had worked for us for almost 4 years. She was good with Lily and Sam. She remembered school projects, medicine, and which bedtime story calmed Sam. That was her job. Daniel sometimes thanked her as if she were doing us a favor. He confused kindness with leadership. That Friday, I was preparing a private dinner for several of his business contacts. I entered the dining room and found the table already set. The glasses were polished. The plates were scented. The linen napkins sat beside each fork exactly as I had written in my notes. Marta stood near the sideboard waiting for approval. Daniel looked at the table and told her it looked beautiful. That irritated me. Not because the table was wrong, because he praised her before I approved it. I walked around the table and told Marta the spacing looked cheap. Then I asked her to do it again. She said she had followed my measurements. I heard correction in her voice. Employees do that when a family becomes too warm with them. They begin explaining instead of listening. I told her the measurements did not matter if the result displeased me. Marta said she understood and began lifting the plates. Daniel put his phone down and asked what had changed since the table had looked perfect seconds earlier. His tone was soft, almost curious. That was how he avoided conflict. He made every challenge sound harmless, then expected me to explain myself until I became tired. I told him I had simply looked more closely. He said Marta had already spent an hour preparing the room and asked whether making her repeat it served any purpose. I told him standards were the purpose. Daniel slowly straightened the corner of one napkin. He always did that when he had nothing strong enough to say. Then he thanked Marta and reminded me that she was an employee, not an object. I laughed. Nobody had called her an object. I had asked her to reset a table in the house where she earned her salary. Lily and Sam had appeared in the doorway. Sam asked why Marta had to do the table again when it was already pretty. I said adults sometimes corrected work children did not understand. He looked at Marta before he left. Not at me. Daniel then asked Marta whether she could still attend Lily's school meeting the next morning. She said she would be there. He did not ask whether I planned to attend. That could have bothered me, but school meetings were part of Marta's duties. We paid her so I could focus on clients and larger decisions. Years earlier, Daniel and I had sat on the floor of our first apartment every Friday night, eating cheap crackers with expensive cheese. We kept a notebook of everything we wanted: a quiet street, 2 children, and a dining room for important guests. Daniel used to say my fire would carry us there. He loved that I refused to stay small. Now he acted as if I should apologize for the heat. Marta finished the table a second time. It looked almost identical. I adjusted one spoon and told her it was better. Then I placed my keys beside my plate. The metal touched the wood with a clear click. Daniel looked at them, then at me. He said nothing. I took his silence as agreement. Marta had become too comfortable, the children too attached, and Daniel too soft to see the difference. I decided that would change. This was my house, my table, my employee. Before the weekend was over, all of them would remember it. The next morning, I found Marta in the breakfast room fixing a ribbon in Lily's hair. Lily sat still for her, smiling at something Marta had said, while Sam pushed pieces of cereal around his bowl and waited for Marta to notice. Neither child looked toward me when I entered. Of course, children prefer the adult who gives them the easiest version of the day. Marta handled ribbons, missing socks, and sweet voices before school. I handled the decisions that paid for all of it. Still, the scene stayed with me. Marta's hand rested on Lily's shoulder for too long, and Lily leaned into it as if that touch belonged there. I told Marta she would begin eating separately from us. She looked at me and asked whether something had happened. I said nothing had happened. I was correcting a boundary that should never have disappeared. Daniel lowered his coffee and asked why a routine that had worked for 4 years suddenly needed changing. I explained that Lily and Sam were becoming confused about Marta's position. He asked what evidence I had of that confusion. His voice was calm and factual, which made the question sound more reasonable than it was. I told him the evidence was sitting in front of us. Sam had asked Marta to pour his milk, even though the carton was beside me. Lily had waited for Marta to fix her hair when I was available. Daniel said those were habits, not evidence. Then he straightened the edge of his placemat. That small movement told me he was already losing the argument. I said Daniel could call it whatever he wanted, but I would not let a paid employee become another parent inside my house. Marta began gathering her plate. Sam picked up his bowl and tried to follow her toward the laundry room. I stopped him and told him family members ate together while employees ate during their break. He asked whether Marta was not part of our family. I said she was paid to help our family. That was different. Lily kept her eyes on the table. She did not defend Marta, and I took her silence as understanding. Marta ate alone beside the washing machine while the 4 of us remained at the breakfast table. Daniel barely touched his food. I considered that another one of his quiet protests. He had always preferred making a room uncomfortable to saying exactly what he meant. Later that afternoon, I heard Sam laughing in the playroom. Toys covered the floor. Plastic animals were under the sofa, wooden blocks filled the doorway, and a blue train had been left where anyone could step on it. Marta was helping Lily glue pictures onto a school poster. I asked why the room had not been cleaned. Sam admitted that he had promised to put the toys away. Marta said she had given him time to do it himself because he needed to learn responsibility. I heard the same thing I had heard at the dining table, explanation before obedience. I told her that if the room was messy, she had failed. Sam said it was his fault. I ordered Marta to clean it anyway. She paused, then began picking up the toys. Sam stood near the sofa watching her collect the mess he had made. I told him this was why people had jobs. Marta was responsible for keeping the house in order. She should have done it before I entered. Marta did not answer, but her mouth tightened. I called her useless under my breath, though not quietly enough to hide it. Lily looked up from her poster. Her face changed, and she pressed the cap onto the glue stick without speaking. That evening, Daniel came into the bedroom while I was answering client messages. He told me Sam had asked him why I hated Marta. He did not accuse me of being difficult in general. He named the exact question, as if repeating a 5-year-old's words made them meaningful. I said Sam was dramatic and probably wanted attention. Daniel replied that Sam had not sounded dramatic. He had sounded worried. I reminded him that children often test parents when rules become stricter. Daniel asked whether calling Marta useless had been part of a rule. I said Marta had failed to do her job. He asked whether making her clean Sam's mess while he watched taught Sam responsibility or taught him that someone with less power would take the blame. I closed my laptop. Daniel could turn one untidy room into a moral speech because he was never the person forced to maintain standards. I told him he was encouraging the children to disrespect me. He straightened the corner of the blanket and said he was trying to understand when correction had become humiliation. I ended the conversation by saying there was nothing to understand. The following day, Sam brought home a drawing titled My Family. Daniel stood near the center. Lily was beside him. Sam had drawn himself holding Marta's hand. I was at the edge of the page, smaller than everyone else, separated from them by a doorway. I asked why Marta was included. Sam said she took care of them. Then he explained that I was usually working or angry, so he had drawn me where I normally stood. For 1 second, I stared at the small figure in the doorway. My hand was not connected to anyone. Marta's hand was connected to his. I could have asked him why. Instead, I asked Marta what she had been telling the children. She said she had never asked them to treat her like family. I replied that adults did not need to ask directly. They could encourage attachment through little things, private jokes, extra hugs, and making a mother look strict. Marta said the children needed warmth as well as rules. That was the closest she had come to openly correcting me. I folded the drawing and pushed it into a desk drawer. Then I told her the boundaries would become stricter. No meals with us, no children in her room, no unnecessary hugging. Marta asked what she should do if one of them came to her crying. I told her to send them to their mother. That afternoon, an email arrived from Lily's school confirming the next parent meeting. It was addressed to Daniel and Marta. My name appeared only in the copied section. I remembered forwarding several school forms to Marta months earlier because I had been planning a charity dinner. Of course, the school contacted the person who completed the paperwork. It meant nothing. I deleted the notification and returned to my schedule. By dinner, I had created a new list of household rules and placed it beside Marta's plate in the laundry room. Lily watched from the hallway as Marta read it. I assumed my daughter was finally learning that kindness did not erase rank. What she was actually learning did not matter to me then. I had seen the drawing. I knew exactly what needed to be corrected, and I intended to correct it before Marta forgot that the family she cared for still belonged to me. 3 days after I placed the new rules beside Marta's plate, Lily fell in the upstairs hallway. I was standing near the bedroom door, close enough to reach her before anyone else. Her sock slipped on the polished floor, and her knee struck the wooden edge of the step. She cried out, looked directly at me, and then screamed for Marta. Marta was downstairs. I was only a few feet away. Still, Lily pushed herself up and tried to pass me, dragging one leg as she moved toward the stairs. I told her to stop and let me see the cut, but she kept calling Marta's name. By the time Marta reached us, Lily had wrapped both arms around her waist. Marta lifted her carefully and carried her into the bathroom while I followed. The cut was small. There was blood, but not enough to justify the way Lily shook against Marta's chest. Marta cleaned the skin, pressed a cloth to it, and spoke in that low voice the children always responded to. I said she was making the situation larger than it was. Marta replied that Lily was frightened. I reminded her that I could see my own daughter's face and did not need an employee explaining it to me. Lily tightened her grip around Marta's neck. That movement said more than any argument, and I hated it. I was her mother. I had chosen her school, paid for her dance lessons, and spent nights fixing problems nobody else even noticed. Yet she had looked at me and run past me as if I were part of the danger. I told Marta to put her down. Marta hesitated. It was only a second, but I saw it. She looked at Lily first, then at me, as though my instruction required the child's approval. I repeated myself. Marta lowered Lily onto the bathroom counter, but Lily kept one hand wrapped around her sleeve. I removed it and told my daughter she was old enough to stop behaving like a baby. Lily went quiet. Marta looked at me in a way I did not like, so I ordered her downstairs. A few minutes later, I entered the breakfast room and dropped my keys onto the table. The metal struck the wood hard enough to make Sam look up from his book. I told Marta that every room in that house existed because Daniel and I paid for it. The beds, the food, and the salary she collected each month all came from us. Affection did not change employment. Marta said she had never claimed otherwise. I replied that her behavior claimed plenty. She had allowed the children to depend on her until they no longer respected the difference between a mother and a nanny. Marta asked whether I wanted her to refuse comfort when they came to her. I said I wanted her to remember who made the decisions. Sam closed his book and moved closer to Marta. Of course he did. She had made herself the safe person while leaving me to enforce every uncomfortable rule. That afternoon, Vanessa came by for coffee. She found me in the garden room checking flower samples for a client's anniversary dinner. Marta was helping Lily build a small paper model at the other end of the room. Vanessa asked about Lily's bandage, and I explained what had happened. I expected her to understand immediately. Vanessa had always said domestic staff became difficult when families treated them like friends. She agreed that Marta's attachment to the children sounded unhealthy, and that was all the encouragement I needed. I called Marta over. Lily tried to follow, but I told her to stay at the table. In front of Vanessa and both children, I said Marta had forgotten her place. I told her she was a servant, not a second parent, and that she had encouraged Lily to reject her own mother. Marta's face became pale, but she did not lower her eyes. She said she had never spoken badly about me to either child. I asked whether she wanted praise for that. Not poisoning children against their mother was the minimum expected from paid help. Vanessa shifted in her chair. I continued because stopping would have looked uncertain. I ordered Marta to apologize for allowing Lily's dependence to grow. Marta said she could apologize if she had crossed a professional boundary, but she would not apologize for comforting a hurt child. That answer was careful, almost respectful, but it was still a refusal. I called her ungrateful. Sam began crying. Lily stood between Marta and me with her hands pressed into fists. Daniel entered through the garden doors before I could send them away. He took in the room, noticed Lily's bandage, and asked what had happened. I told him Marta had once again challenged me in front of the children. He did not respond to that first. He crouched beside Lily and asked how badly her knee hurt. Then he told Marta to take both children outside for a few minutes. I expected a fight after the doors closed. Instead, Daniel walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and removed Sam's family drawing. I had forgotten it was there. He unfolded it slowly and smoothed the bent corner with his thumb. Then he straightened the pencil cup beside it. That small, controlled movement irritated me more than shouting would have. I said he was making a performance out of a child's picture. Daniel asked why our daughter had run past me while she was hurt. I told him Lily was dramatic and Marta encouraged it. He said the children were beginning to fear me. His voice stayed low. He did not accuse me of being a bad mother. He described what he had seen. Sam going silent when I entered a room, Lily watching my face before answering, and both children choosing Marta whenever they needed comfort. I said children needed to know who was in charge. Daniel replied that fear was not respect. I accused him of choosing an employee over his wife. He said he should have spoken sooner. He admitted that he had kept waiting for me to calm down because every direct challenge made me more defensive. I used the admission immediately. I told him his weakness had created the confusion. He had allowed Marta to act like family because he was too passive to protect the boundaries of our home. Daniel did not deny that he avoided conflict. He said his silence was a failure, but it did not make my behavior acceptable. Vanessa had become quiet. When Daniel left, I asked her whether she agreed that he was overreacting. She said Marta might be too close to the children, but my words had sounded harsher than necessary. I told her she had not lived inside my house and did not understand the pressure. Vanessa nodded, but she did not support me again. Later that evening, I heard Marta speaking to Daniel near his office. I caught only part of it. She said she might need to resign because the situation was becoming harmful for the children. Daniel answered too softly for me to hear. I returned to my room smiling. Resignation meant the pressure was working. Still, I was not going to let Marta leave quietly and pretend she had made the decision. I had a formal dinner coming soon, with guests who mattered to both Daniel and me. Marta would stay until then. She would serve the table, follow my instructions, and remember what she had been hired to do. By the end of that evening, Nobody would confuse an employee with the woman who owned the house. I spent the next week preparing the most important dinner I had hosted in months. 12 guests, 4 courses, imported wine, white flowers arranged low enough that nobody would need to lean around them while speaking. Of course, people say a family dinner should feel natural, but natural is only another word for poorly controlled. My clients paid me because I understood that every detail sends a message. This dinner would send one clearly. The house was mine, the family was mine, and Marta was an employee who had become confused about both. I invited 2 of Daniel's business contacts, several neighbors, one of my largest clients, Daniel's sister Rebecca, Vanessa, and Dr. Harris, the children's doctor. I told Marta she would serve the table herself. She asked whether we could speak privately. We stood in the dining room while the afternoon light cut across the empty plates. Marta said she wanted to finish her employment before the dinner. She explained that the atmosphere was becoming harmful for Lily and Sam, and she did not believe staying was helping them anymore. I reminded her that she had agreed to give notice. Marta said she would work the required days, but hoped Daniel and I would arrange another caregiver as soon as possible. I heard judgment hidden inside every careful word. She wanted to leave as the worried protector while I became the mother who had driven her away. I told her she would complete the dinner first. Leaving before an event important to the family would be irresponsible. Marta looked toward the hallway and said Lily had already asked whether she was leaving. I replied that this was exactly why emotional boundaries mattered. An employee should be replaceable. Marta said children did not experience people that way. I ended the conversation by handing her the final serving schedule. The next morning, Rebecca arrived early to help Daniel with something in his office. She found me in the dining room while Marta brought coffee and adjusted the flower arrangements for the 3rd time. I told Marta the roses were too high. She lowered them. Then I said the arrangement looked flat. Rebecca watched Marta remove the flowers again and asked why she looked exhausted. I said good domestic workers often performed tiredness when they wanted employers to lower their standards. Rebecca did not smile. She asked whether I listened to myself when I spoke about Marta. I told her she had come for dinner, not to review my household. Rebecca said Lily talked about Marta constantly and barely mentioned me anymore. Because she was Daniel's sister, the comment landed differently. Strangers could misunderstand. Rebecca had known me for 11 years. For half a second, I wanted to ask what Lily had said. Instead, I accused Rebecca of always waiting for a chance to judge me. She said she was not judging my furniture or my parties. She was worried about the children. I told her worry was easy when somebody else handled the difficult decisions. Rebecca went into Daniel's office without answering. Later, I followed her because I needed Daniel to approve the seating plan. Rebecca had already left the room. Daniel sat behind his desk holding the old notebook we had used during the first years of our marriage. The cover was bent, and several pages had come loose. Inside were our plans for the future: 2 children, a quiet street, and a dining room large enough for guests. Daniel ran his thumb across one of the pages. He looked tired. Not angry, just tired. I asked why he had taken it out. He said he had been trying to remember what we once wanted the house to feel like. I told him it felt successful. He said it looked successful. Then he explained that a home could be beautiful while the people inside it were afraid to speak. I said he was being dramatic because Marta had complained to him again. Daniel carefully lined the notebook with the edge of his desk. The same controlled movement. A napkin, a placemat, a drawing, and now the notebook. He always needed to straighten something when he could not straighten me. He asked whether I planned to use the dinner to embarrass Marta. I said I planned to host my guests and expected my employee to do her job. Daniel told me not to turn the evening into another punishment. I asked why protecting my authority looked like punishment to him. He did not answer in the way I wanted. He only said that authority should not need an audience. That evening, I passed Lily's bedroom and heard her speaking to Marta. The door was partly open. Marta was helping her choose a dress for the dinner. Lily asked whether Marta would still visit after she left. Marta said she could not promise anything until the adults made decisions. Lily began crying without making a sound. She held the sleeve of Marta's dress and asked why she had to go. Marta told her that none of it was Lily's fault. My hand touched the door. I nearly entered. Lily was not planning against me. She was 7 years old and afraid of losing someone who had been part of every morning she could remember. For one quiet second, I saw the shape of what I had created. Then Lily said she wished Marta could always stay with her. I removed my hand from the door. That sentence closed the opening. Marta's kindness had not protected my place. It had made her dangerous. On the night of the dinner, Dr. Harris arrived while Marta was checking the children's clothes. He greeted her warmly and thanked her for keeping such careful notes about Lily's allergy medicine and Sam's recent cough. He said her records had made every appointment easier. I had not known they spoke so often. Marta replied that she only wanted to make sure nothing was missed. I told Dr. Harris that paperwork was part of what we paid her for. He looked at me for a moment, then asked Lily how her knee was healing. I dismissed the exchange, but the room felt different after it. Another person outside the house already saw Marta as the one who knew the children's daily needs. Vanessa arrived last. When I joked that Marta would earn every dollar of her final paycheck that night, Vanessa looked toward Lily instead of laughing. I asked whether something was wrong. She said she was tired from work. Of course she was. People often became uncomfortable when strength was no longer entertaining. By 7:30, every guest was seated. The candles burned evenly. The glasses shone beneath the chandelier. Lily and Sam sat beside Daniel, dressed exactly as I had planned. Marta stood near the wall holding the first tray. Daniel straightened his napkin and looked at me across the table. I placed my keys beside my plate. Everything was ready. I only needed one clear moment to remind the room that Marta served in my house because I allowed her to. The first course went exactly as I had planned. Marta moved around the table without speaking, refilling water and removing plates before anyone needed to ask. I guided the conversation toward Daniel's work, my latest event, and the renovations I had supervised that spring. The guests admired the dining room. One of my clients said the house looked ready for a magazine. I thanked her as if it were a simple compliment, though of course I had spent years making sure people reacted that way. Marta brought in the second course, and Lily watched her from beside Daniel. Sam barely ate. Each time Marta passed behind his chair, he turned his head to follow her. I told him to face the table. Daniel straightened the edge of his napkin. He had been doing it all evening, making that small movement whenever I corrected one of the children or asked Marta to move faster. I read it as embarrassment. He knew the guests could see that he had lost control of his own household, and he had no idea how to take it back. I decided to make the arrangement clear before dessert. Marta placed a glass of red wine beside my plate. It was positioned correctly, but I moved my elbow as she stepped away. The glass tipped. Wine spread across the pale rug, and the glass broke near the leg of my chair. Marta stopped. Every face turned toward us. I looked down at the stain and asked how she could be so careless during an important dinner. She said the glass had been stable when she placed it there. That answer made the moment useful. I told her mistakes became worse when employees refused to admit them. Marta reached for a cloth, but I instructed her to pick up the broken pieces first. She asked me to move my chair so she could reach safely. I did not move. I told her she had created the mess and could clean it where it was. Marta lowered herself beside my chair. Her hands shook as she gathered the glass. The room had gone silent except for the quiet sound of pieces touching the tray. I said this was what happened when servants forgot their place. They received kindness, confused it with equality, and then acted offended when someone reminded them why they were there. Marta kept her eyes on the floor. I called her useless and said affection from children did not turn a paid nanny into family. Rebecca put down her fork. Vanessa whispered that I should stop. I told her I was handling a household problem and did not need advice at my own table. Lily began crying. Sam pushed away from his chair and ran to Marta. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders while she was still kneeling beside me. I ordered him to return to his seat. He refused. Lily left her chair next and stood behind Marta, pressing both hands against her back. I said they were embarrassing themselves in front of our guests. Neither child moved. Daniel placed his napkin beside his plate. He asked me whether I had knocked the glass over on purpose. His voice was quiet, but the question crossed the table more sharply than shouting would have. I told him accidents happened, and the important thing was how employees responded to them. Daniel said the glass was not the real problem. He told me the children had watched me invent reasons to punish someone they trusted. I accused him of humiliating me in my own house. He said I had created the scene myself. Marta tried to stand, but Sam held on to her. I told both children to come to me immediately. Lily turned around. Her face was wet, and she said she did not want me near her. Sam said they were afraid of me. I reminded them that I was their mother and would not accept that kind of disrespect. Lily answered that mothers were not supposed to make people cry for fun. Then she told me to leave them alone. Sam repeated it. He said they did not want me there. 12 guests heard my own children reject me while holding the woman I paid to care for them. For a few seconds, nobody touched a glass or lifted a fork. I looked at Daniel and expected him to correct them. Instead, he asked me to apologize to Marta, end the dinner, and agree to get professional help. He said we could still protect Lily and Sam from more damage if I admitted that my behavior was wrong. He made the offer as if I were the unstable person in the room. As if Marta had not spent years making herself necessary. As if he had not stood beside us, silent, while the distance inside our marriage became wide enough for another woman to fill it. I told him he had no right to judge me. For years, he had withdrawn whenever I needed him to fight for us. He solved practical problems, paid bills, and organized schedules, but he left me emotionally alone inside the life we had built. Then he watched me become harder and acted surprised by the result. Daniel did not deny it. He said he had failed by staying silent for too long. He admitted that his distance had hurt our marriage. Then he said his failure did not excuse what I had chosen to do to Marta or the children. I laughed, because the alternative was allowing the room to believe I was ashamed. I announced that if he agreed with them, then he was no longer my husband. I said I would file for divorce. I asked what he thought he would do without me. My contacts, my clients, and the woman who had turned that house into something people respected. Daniel became even quieter. He folded the napkin once, pressed the edge flat, and set it down. Then he said he would handle everything properly. That was all. No anger. No demand that I reconsider. No attempt to stop me. I took his calm for surrender. He knew I had called his bluff in front of everyone, and he had nothing left. I turned toward Vanessa, expecting her to remind the guests that every marriage had private problems. Her chair was empty. Her glass was still half full, but her coat was gone. She had left without saying goodbye. I refused to let that small act weaken me. I stood and announced that the dinner was over. Then I told Marta she was fired and ordered her to leave my children alone. Daniel remained seated for another second, his hand resting beside the folded napkin. I raised my voice and repeated that this was my house. Nobody answered quickly enough, so I treated their silence as obedience. I had ended the marriage before Daniel could threaten me with it. I had removed Marta before she could take anything else. The guests had seen who made the final decision. As far as I was concerned, the matter was finished. I had won. Daniel stood. He folded the napkin one final time, pressed the edge flat, and looked at Marta. Then he explained that I kept calling her the help because that title made me feel powerful. It had never been her real title inside our home. Marta was the person Lily trusted after a fall, the person Sam drew holding his hand, the person the school contacted, and the person Dr. Harris relied on for the children's medical details. None of it was new. Every fact had happened in front of me. I had simply given each one a smaller meaning. Daniel said Marta had been raising our children while I used money and ownership to prove I was still their mother. She was the one they ran toward and the one who made them feel safe. In every way that mattered to Lily and Sam, she had become the mother inside that house and the woman who held it together. He was not offering her my marriage. He was naming the place she had already earned. Sam took his family drawing from the sideboard and carried it to Marta. She held it against her chest and cried without looking at me. I accused her of teaching the children to reject me. Dr. Harris answered that children did not need to be taught to seek safety. Nobody argued. I reached for Vanessa, but her chair was empty. Then I grabbed my keys and said nobody could remove me from my own home. Daniel reminded me that I had demanded the divorce. He held out his hand. I kept the keys inside my fist until the metal cut my palm. Nobody moved to comfort me. At last, I dropped them into his hand. The next morning, Daniel filed a divorce petition and requested temporary possession of the house while custody was reviewed. I moved into a furnished apartment owned by one of my clients. My money remained, but the life it had purchased did not. Rebecca stopped answering my calls, and the guests stopped inviting me. Marta stayed with the children to keep their routine stable. One client ended her contract with me. I had spent my life escaping the woman who cleaned rich people's homes, only to become the rich woman who made a working woman kneel at her feet. I demanded that everyone remember who ran that house. They did. They just decided it would never be me again. The keys were still warm in my hand, to a home that no longer kept a door for me.